Hello everybody, thanks for clicking on this video. On April the 30th I posted an Ecuagenera unboxing video. And if you haven't watched that video, I would suggest to watch that one before today's video, because today's video is a 3-week update on the 13 plants that I got in the April video. Now you might remember that my Ecuagenera experience in April was quite bad. Only 6 out of the 13 plants were more or less okay, and the rest were a hot mess. And I was surprised because this was the first time I didn't have my Ecuagenera plants directly shipped to my place, because this time I picked them up at their pop-up store in my country, which is Belgium. Now in the April video I also predicted the chances for survival for each plant. So let's see whether I was right or wrong. Now in the meanwhile you're already watching the very first plant, which is the Philodendron palloraense, a beautiful plant that I gave 100% survival chance because it was the only plant I handpicked myself at a pop-up store, and as you can see it's doing just fine. And the same can be said about the second plant, which is the Philodendron rugapetyolatum, that came in a pretty good shape in April, and I gave it a 90% survival chance, and I think I was right because the last 3 weeks this plant has been thriving. There is a new growing point and all the leaves on this plant are actually doing just fine. So no problems with this second philodendron. Now the third plant is the only one that's not a philodendron. It's the Chlorospatha corogata. And I gave it a 60% survival chance in April because it needs an extremely high level of humidity. But I put it next to my humidifier and so far it's hanging in there. But I think it's not out of the danger zone just yet. We will have to see. Now the fourth plant is actually an interesting case. It's the Philodendron scotianum that I gave only a 50% chance of survival because all the leaves were heavily stained. Now you can see it lost all its leaves except for one, and it doesn't look like much at the moment, but there is a healthy growing point on this plant. So in the end I'm quite confident that this plant will survive. And we can actually continue with some good news because the fifth plant, which is the Philodendron hellenii subspecies amazonense that you see here, I gave this plant a 90% survival chance in April because it arrived in actually a perfect shape. There was nothing wrong with it. And the last 3 weeks it has been thriving. It even sprouted a new leaf. It's the one that you see on the right on top. That's a little bit greener. So this plant is also doing just fine so far. Now, as I said before, all was not well with the plants that I got in April, and the next one, which is the Philodendron verum, or rather what's left of it, I only gave a 30% survival chance, and here you can see some footage of when it arrived at my place. All the leaves had this very unhealthy zombie green color, and I was right, because a couple of days later all these leaves were gone. And 3 weeks later, this is the result. I mean, I don't think there is any life left in this plant. It looks like a modern sculpture, but I think it's dead. Now, if you thought that things can't get any worse, please have a look at this Philodendron fujkatum. I think this plant is totally dead. Here you can see some footage of the day when it arrived. It was already in pretty bad shape. The leaves looked very unhealthy, and I gave this plant I think a 40% chance for survival, and actually it was a lot less than 40%. It turned out to be 0%, so this plant will go in the bin pretty soon. Next up is the Philodendron barozoanum 5, also known as 3 sticks and 1 rotting growing point at the moment. Now in April I gave this plant a 50% survival chance because, as you can see here, several leaves were already snapped off the plant when it arrived at my place, and the other leaves were about to fall off the plant, as I explained in the video in April. Now at the same time I'm still gonna hang on to this plant because the stems look still quite green, so there is still a little bit of hope. Next up is this Philodendron bulgrum. And in my April video, I mainly complained that Ecuagenera actually sold me or sent me a baby plant, whereas I paid the price of an adult specimen. Now you can see there is one small and one big leaf left at the moment. So I'm going to hang on to this plant, but I don't think it's out of the danger zone just yet. But we'll have to see. The next plant I want to show you is the Philodendron melanocrism. And this plant actually arrived in a pretty good shape. And in the last 3 weeks, actually not much has happened with this plant. It's just living its life. It hasn't sprouted any new leaves, but it hasn't lost any leaves either. So I think this plant will probably survive in the future. Now I can be really short about the next one, the Philodendron geniculatum, that I threw away because it died 2 days after arrival. Perhaps you remember that almost all the leaves were snapped off during shipping, and it didn't survive that. It's as simple as that. This is a picture of the plant when it arrived at my place. It looked really sad, and it's dead. Next up is this Philodendron rubrosingtune platinum. In April, I gave this plant a 50% chance to survive. It came to me with 4 leaves. The last 3 weeks, it has lost 2 of the 4 leaves. And the 2 remaining leaves don't really look pretty. But I'm still a little bit hopeful for this plant because the stem actually looks really bright green. And those 2 leaves are still holding on to the plant, so I think it might survive. Last but not least, this Philodendron pendulatum. This plant came to me in April in actually a very good shape. I think this is a beautiful plant. And the last 3 weeks it has been thriving. There is a big growing point that will pretty soon give me a new leaf, I think. And so this plant will definitely survive. Now, you must know that I sent pictures to Ecuagenera of the 6 plants that arrived clinically dead, and after some email exchanges, they decided to replace these 6 plants for free. Which I think is a great thing, obviously, but it's also the decent thing to do when plants arrive in such a bad shape that they are beyond saving. So as soon as these 6 replacement plants will arrive, I will make an update video. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye bye.